right. I think that's my cue. So thanks again, everybody, for joining this evening. I'm sure more people are gonna pop in as we go along. But we're just gonna go ahead and get started. I think tonight's session is gonna be a phenomenal one. There's some really brilliant minds with us as panelists this evening. I just wanted to start by saying welcome everybody to the Open Road Fund's Black Wealth Community Education Series. This is our 2024 inaugural edition of the series. And the Open Road Fund is a Black community wealth building initiative of Nexus Community Partners. So if you are not familiar with Nexus as an organization, we are a nonprofit organization. We are Black led. We're located in St. Paul, Minnesota, and our mission is to build more engaged and powerful communities of color by supporting community building initiatives that expand our people's capacities to build wealth, leadership, and collective power, which is why we're having this session tonight. The Open Road Fund is stewarded by this organization, Nexus Community Partners, and it was seeded with funding by the Bush Foundation. As a fund, we make gifts of $50,000 to individuals and groups of up to 2 to 5 people of African descent whose ancestors were enslaved as a result of the Mid-Atlantic slave trade. And our fund specifically serves descendants of those ancestors who have chosen to live, make community, and build wealth in Minnesota, South Dakota, and North Dakota. And we're centered around 5 main wealth building themes, of which education is one. The others are financial well-being, housing and shelter, economic ownership and power, which can include starting a business or starting a cooperative enterprise that's owned by all of the members, and health and healing, which could include things like getting medical treatment or even taking a legacy trip to the South or to Africa or another place in the Black diaspora. We don't do this work alone. So the photos that you are seeing are this year and last year's Community Advisory Committee. And so these are folks who, for the last almost 3 years, our team has collaborated with across the 3 regions that our funding program serves: Minnesota, North, and South Dakota. And we also have a partner in the research, evaluation, and learning aspects of our work as the Open Road Fund. And that's the team, Research and Action. They are a Black woman-led, owned, run research and evaluation organization who has helped to guide our evaluation and research process for the last 2 years almost. Um, and so just to set us up for the discussion, we wanted to talk a little bit about the theme of education, which is the focus of tonight's conversation. And so first, I want to say the wealth building themes that we have were co-developed through community surveys. Thousands of people across the Open Road Fund region responded and let us know, one, how they would define Black wealth as in a way that is broader than just dollars and cents and property. And they also let us know through our work with Research and Action how we might support folks in different projects broader than broader than just supporting businesses. And education was one of those. And so the definition of education that we offer is that Black wealth should advance educational access and attainment by providing people with the means to continue their education through multiple pathways, not just universities, and to save for the education of future generations. We see it as crucial to receive education that is high quality and also culturally aware and rooted. Black wealth through support for education can exist within and outside of formal institutional school settings, such as access to training, apprenticeships, pathways for sharing ancestral, cultural, or historical knowledge, and lifting up the knowledge that already exists within our communities. Building Black wealth around education, we believe, provides Black people with an array of options for how we may wish to continue to contribute to our communities and the greater world around us. And so that's our framing of education as a pathway for building wealth. So before we begin, I got two more things to say. The first is I want to go over the agenda with y'all. I want to start by saying that this space is a safe space in which Blackness, in which our people are centered, and we want to honor self-care. And so if the need arises for whatever reason that you need to step away, take a break during this session, we encourage you warmly to do so and take care of yourself. Come back if you feel ready. We'll reserve about a half an hour at the end of this workshop for questions from you all to the panelists, and we will take those through our Q&A section, which will open up. Those questions, you'll want to enter them into the Q&A chat box at the bottom of your Zoom screen. And then the other things that we have on the agenda are, I'm going to introduce our workshop facilitator. I'm really excited to do that. We're going to show you an excerpt of a documentary. Oh, can you go back to the agenda? Just one second. Too fast, Tech. Yeah, so Chloe is our facilitator. She's going to introduce the panelists. We're going to have a discussion. We'll open it up again for Q&A. And then after Q&A, you should stick around because we're going to talk about resources that are available or up and coming that you might be interested in. We'll talk about some next steps. And then we would really, really appreciate it if you all filled out our survey about how tonight's session was for you, what you learned, what you took away, what we could improve upon in upcoming sessions. And then we'll close out. All right, so now let me introduce Chloe, because this is the part I've been waiting for. So Chloe Clements is a Sioux Falls, South Dakota hero, shero, organizer, leader, educator. She is not only a member of the Open Road Fund Advisory Committee, but she's also a diversity consultant. Chloe's done that for 6 years and has leveraged her practices and philosophy around diversity, equity, and inclusion to create culturally affirming and inclusive learning institutions, particularly for our young learners. Chloe also is a co-founder and executive director of ACE Academy, which is South Dakota's first secular primary school rooted in anti-racist teachings and practice. Chloe is committed to healing race relations, building cultural awareness through culturally responsive education, social justice, and racial equity, and all of the work that she does. And armed with that firsthand experience, her years in advocacy work, and her power as an organizer, Chloe deeply understands marginalized communities and the organizations that interact with all of us. She's passionate about partnering with community leaders, about driving initiatives, directing events to foster cultural competency, and also is someone who believes in fostering the power of education in the spirit of liberation and uplift for our communities. And so with that, I want to pass it over to Chloe. I did have to read that whole thing because yeah, I'm sure that there's even more stuff that should be on your bio, but I know you're super humble. So I'm gonna pass it to you so that we can get into the discussion for tonight. Thank y'all for being here.
Thanks, Dewaba. Hello, everybody. As introduced, my name is Chloe, and it's really an honor to be here with you guys today as your moderator for today's webinar. We're going to be diving into the tapestry of our education system and really its historical underpinnings as it relates to the Black community or the Black diaspora. Throughout our time tonight, we're going to, of course, talk about education, and we're going to talk about some of the complexities that come with that between like the policies and the practices and societal norms that really have shaped its evolution as we see. We will touch on the persistent shadows of the discriminatory practices that have been found in education. So like Dewaba said, if you need to take a moment or anything like that at any point, feel free to do so. But more than that, what I'm most excited about is to jump into the diverse array of educational models, of course, including higher education, trades, entrepreneurial pursuits, and then the the cultural community ways of knowing that we have as a people. So I'm so excited to facilitate this discussion today. It's going to be enlightening and thought-provoking. And so as we navigate these topics, I really encourage everyone to listen actively, note any insights you have, use the Q&A feature on Zoom to list your questions, because we're going to be coming back to those. And then really just embrace your opportunity to broaden our collective understanding as a group. We are going to actually start tonight off with a video clip that features Nicole Hannah-Jones on the color of education. And then we are going to meet our incredible panelists and then end our night with questions. So whenever we're ready, we can jump into that video.
So we're gonna go back. People who know my work know my like lifelong ambition is to get slavery in my stories, which I haven't yet. But my book is going back to slavery, so I'm gonna get there. But what I realize is most Americans, we don't know very much about our history at all. And when it comes to the history of race, we have downright amnesia. So a timeline, I think, is helpful if we want to understand, why is this so hard? Why 60 years, almost 65 years after Brown v. Board of Education, are we still dealing with this? It's because we need to understand that this is who we are as a country. If you look at the timeline, the English land at Jamestown in 1607, and it takes us only 12 years to import Africans to be enslaved. We are not even a country yet. We are only a colony. And it only takes us 12 years before we've decided there will be a caste of people who will not be citizens, who will not be treated, who can be bought and sold. If you understand that, then you understand that racism is in the DNA of our country. It is not a feature of our country. It is in the fiber of our country. It would take us another 150 years before we decide we even want to become our own country, when we declare independence from Great Britain. I wonder how many of you, since we're on a college campus, have ever read the original Declaration of Independence as drafted by Thomas Jefferson? Anyone? Anyone want to recite it? Just playing. The original Declaration of Independence actually speaks about the institution of slavery. And in that original draft, Thomas Jefferson castigates the British for introducing slavery into the colonies. He says that slavery is a great evil, and he understands the hypocrisy of trying to start what you say will be the most freest country that the world has ever seen, the greatest democratic republic the world has ever seen, while holding a fifth of your population in bondage with no legal or civil or human rights. Unfortunately, in order to get enough signers to that declaration, he has to remove that passage. And of course, we all know that Thomas Jefferson himself owned human beings, including his own children, and he would own those human beings until the day he died. So the declaration that ultimately starts our country is a declaration that allows for the bondage of a fifth of the population. And it would continue until 90 years later, when we have to fight the bloodiest war in the history of our country in order to end the institution of slavery. Now, I know I'm in the South, so I'm just going to make this clear in case anyone isn't sure. The Civil War was fought about slavery, okay? Now, some might argue it was states' rights, and I say yes, the state's right to own slaves. So let's just be real. So this institution nearly tears our country apart. We finally fight this war and we end slavery. And then we immediately, after a brief period of Reconstruction, enter into another 100 years of legal apartheid known as Jim Crow. It is not until 1968, with the passage of the last great civil rights legislation, the Fair Housing Act, that Black Americans get full citizenship rights in the country of their birth, in the country of their grandparents' birth, their great-grandparents' birth, and their great-great-grandparents' birth. Those of you whose ancestors came over in the 1970s or the 1960s or the 1950s or the 1940s, if you were white, your ancestors could come here and immediately have more rights than Black people whose ancestors had gone back 100 or 200 or 300 years. So when you understand that history, it's not surprising that we still struggle. Then we have 1976, which I would consider the greatest event in all of American history. I was born. I don't know why y'all are laughing. You see where I got my affinity for big hair. Now, if there are some historians in here, they may disagree that that was one of the great events in American history, but this is my speech, so I can say that. But I point that out because I was born in 1976. I am part of the first generation of Black people in this country born into a country with full legal rights. This is not ancient history. Let me say that one more time. I am in the first generation of Black people in the history of this country who was born with full legal citizenship rights. When we want to say, why do you keep thinking about the past? Why don't people get over it? Why isn't everything okay? When you understand that, then you understand that it's been a very, very short time where Black people even had the legal rights. And that's not making up for 400 years of not being able to earn income, not having the ability to control your own schools, not having the ability to live where you want to live, not having the ability to build wealth. So less than 10 years before I was born, it was perfectly legal to deny someone like myself housing because of the color of my skin. 10 years before I was born, it was illegal for me to exist in North Carolina and many southern states because my mother is white and my father is Black. 15 years before I was born, it was perfectly legal for me to be denied access to a public library or a public pool or a restaurant or a school. So when you look at that, and I know I look very, very youthful, when you understand that my father, not just my grandmother or my great-grandmother, that my father was born in Greenwood, Mississippi in 1945 without rights. He had to be delivered in the shack on the cotton plantation where his family were sharecroppers because the hospital did not serve Black people. This is not ancient history that we're talking about. And we've done very, very little to address this past. Don't look at me a little longer. I was cute. So if we go all the way back to slavery and we think about that in this country, there's only been one group of people where it was illegal to teach us to read. Black people are the only people in the history of the United States where it was against the law to teach us to read, and it was against the law for us to be able to write. Then you understand why we still struggle to have educational equality. Because why would one deny an entire race of people the right to read and write? It's because you understand that it is hard to control a people who is able to read and to write and to think and to process information. That once people began to have an education, they begin to question their circumstance. One of the biggest fears, of course, was abolitionist literature, literature being written by enslaved people who had run away, that was challenging the system. It was also the fear of even the Bible, because while enslavers like to teach the passages about slave obey their master, they didn't really want Black people reading the passages about Israel's fleeing slavery, right? So as I've been researching for my book and trying to draw this direct line between the struggle for educational equality that Black people experience now and the struggle for educational equality that we have always experienced, I've been going back and reading the slave narratives. And what you realize is that one of the most pernicious myths in American society is that Black people are the only people in the history of the world who don't value an education. We hear that all the time. Black kids aren't doing well because their parents don't value education, and neither do they. But nothing could be further from the truth. When you're reading from people who had been beaten, who had been sexually assaulted, who had had their children sold away from them, and over again, what they keep saying is the thing they could not forgive was being deprived of their education. And that despite the fact that you could be whipped, you could have your fingers cut off, and you could be killed for learning to read or teaching other enslaved people to read, people still did it anyway. So this myth about Black people not valuing education arises to serve a purpose, because then it justifies the poor quality of education that Black people are receiving. Because for Black people, literacy has always been about liberation. It hasn't been about how much money can you make. It has been about will you be free or not. One of the biggest fear that enslavers had was that Black people were going to write their own paths to freedom, which they did.
Now, I've seen that clip a few times by Nicole, and every single time I'm really just struck by her insights and how she makes her connections to slavery with the historical context of education. So what I want to do is, as we reflect on her words, of course, let's use that as a foundation for today's conversation with our panelists, and really reflect on that as we introduce our panelists and keep her words in mind about the myths revolving on education and some of those historical connections that she made. So we'll introduce our panelists and hear more of their thoughts and insights on the matter. Man, I need to update my bio photo. This is pretty cool. One of our panelists today is Bryant Howard. He is an entrepreneur and an owner of O'Here. He's a multifaceted creative entrepreneur whose goal is to advocate for younger people, especially and specifically Black young professionals. As a leader, it's been his mission to create opportunities and teach all those who are willing to learn how to pave their own way and provide resources in order to be successful. His brand, O'Here, is built upon men's mental health and portrayed through their art and fashion. He strives to not only build a legacy for himself, but those who come after him. We are so excited to have Bryant on our panelists today. Thank you so much for being here. Next up, we have Willette Capers, who is the Assistant Vice Provost for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at Augustana University right here in Sioux Falls with me. We're definitely excited to have Willette here. She's been in higher education for 20 years, and while in higher education, she's worked at a number of institutions, including predominantly white institutions, Hispanic-serving institutions, as well as historically Black colleges and universities. Willette holds a Bachelor's of Arts from Clarion University in English Literature and Theater, and a Master of Science in Educational Leadership from Troy University with a concentration in higher education. Thank you. We weren't done talking about Miss Willette yet. Where all of her research, she's currently a doctorate student at Northeastern University. I thought they said we didn't like education, where her research focuses on the impact of value for Black women and their persistent rates in the academy. Willette Capers is a certified diversity advocate in IDI, Intercultural Development Inventory QA. She has dedicated her career to D&I work, and alongside of her various speaking engagements, Willette specializes in diversity training, critical race theory, intercultural development, strategic planning, curriculum development, CAS standards, diversity audits, and program review. If you can't tell by her bio, Willette is more than qualified to be on our educational panels today, and we are so excited to have her. Next, we have Honora CSR. He is an educator, publisher, and a firefighter. Brother Honora is an educator, publisher, and firefighter. And as a former teacher, he worked in the Minneapolis Public Schools and at Harvest Preparatory School in the 1990s. He's the coordinator of the Imhotep Science Academy, a K-8 STEM Saturday program. Honora is the publisher of Papyrus Publishing, Inc. and a firefighter with the Minneapolis Police Department. He has been on Harvest Best Academy's board since 2008. Clearly a man of diverse talents. We are so excited to have Honora with us as well. So now that we have been introduced to our esteemed panelists, it's really time to dive in to the heart of our discussion. As we can see from their bios, all of our panelists bring a wealth of knowledge and experience to the table, and I'm really eager to hear their perspectives on the complex issues that we're here to explore today. So without further ado, we're going to transition into our discussions. We're going to first begin by examining the historical context of discriminatory education policies and practices. And then, of course, diving into the educational pathways and models that are available today. I encourage all of our panelists to share their insights openly. However, I want to be mindful of our response time and their length, trying to keep things to about 2 to 3 minutes per question so we can get to them all, and then, of course, open it up for our Q&A session at the end. So for now, our audience is going to actively listen, and if you have questions, again, use the Q&A feature on Zoom, and then we will keep track of those questions and comments as we explore these concepts together. So we are going to move right now into our Q&A section. So we really took some time to think about our questions and who they fit, given their backgrounds. So I have a tailored question for each of our panelists. But I want to start off today by having a general question that I kind of want all of you to go through, and then um, and then we'll ask our specific questions. So first, I want you guys to share the work that you do, why you choose to do it, and then how what you do is a catalyst for building wealth in the Black community. So I'm just gonna go in the order that you're on my screen. So Brian, if you want to go first, I just want you to share the work you do, why you do it, and how it's a catalyst for building wealth in the Black community.
Hi, I'm honored to be on this panel. I am Brian Howard. My brand is O'Hare, which is basically meant to advocate for African American men. My I am a model and I also am a photographer, so those are my two main career paths of why. And the reason why I chose it was like since a child, I've always like been in the arts and I've just always been artistic, I should say. So I just wanted to bet on myself and, being my own boss and being an entrepreneur. And, there's not many African American leaders in the art world, in my opinion. And I would love to be one of those people who are trying to pave the way for myself and people behind me. Most of my family is from Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and there's not many opportunities in that city. So moving to Minnesota with my mom when I was a young age really like opened my eyes like, wow, there's really more to life. And I want to take what I've learned to Milwaukee, like, hey, there's more, like what you're good at right now without even, going to post-secondary school, like you can really make a way for yourself. You can really like create your own path. So like that's always been my goal, and that's why I think that's how I think I'm helping like build wealth for my community by like taking what I've learned and just pitching it on to the next people. Can you repeat the question? I'm kind of like blank.
Absolutely. You actually answered it. So sharing what you do, why you're doing it, why it's important to you, and then how do you consider that to be bringing wealth back to your community? And I think that you really answered that really quite well. I love that you said that you're from Milwaukee and you've kind of gathered all of this information and insight in Minnesota, and you still want to bring that back to your community. I think that that's something that's really special about the Black community, is wanting to share and grow within our own community. So thank you for that. Honora, do you mind going next and sharing what you do, why you do it, and how it's building wealth?
Sure, Anura CSR. First, let me thank you, Chloe, for moderating this great discussion. And definitely shout out to the Open Road Fund team there. Definitely you're a prime example of how Black people can work together. It's important to have examples and the examples with vision, importantly. But also want to thank our ancestors whose shoulders I stand on, and hopefully they're guiding me with the words I say today. But I consider myself an educator, organizer, institution builder. Our youth is really our only wealth in this community. I mean, we can think about the houses and everything like that. If there's no children, there's nothing. And so my focus has been on our children, on our young people, the education, the nurturing, the socialization through our science academy that we have, also through Harvest Preparatory School, which I still continue to work with as a K-8 charter school, African Center Charter School in North Minneapolis. And the question of, the role of enslavement or the Holocaust of enslavement or slavery, in my perspective, and I love what Sister Hannah Nicole Jones is doing, but that was an interruption to our existence and our history. We had a history before that, and we were people before that. That process dehumanized us, erased us, deformed us to some degree. And so it's important for our children to know that your existence isn't just here in this country. You didn't just pop up. You were brought here. You were brought here from many peoples, many civilizations that had many cultures. And we have those remnants in us, those residual pieces in us. And those are the things that we have to accentuate and acknowledge and know that we have a history longer than this, 500, 250, whatever years that we have here in North America, that our history is way much longer than that. And that we have plenty to draw on besides just some of the corrupt models that are here in this country. And so using our ancestors, our knowledge, what we've created as a resource for building our wealth and who we are as a people to hopefully have some functional unity to build this wealth of other kind of wealth, some material and other stuff, is the foundation. And so I'll stop there for right now. Thank you.
No, thank you, Honora CSR. That was beautifully spoken. I appreciate your viewpoint of seeing our youth as our wealth. And again, answered, while different than Bryant, right on the money of how you're investing back and how you're building wealth as you see it in your lane through the youth. So thank you so much for that. Willette, if you can kind of jump in and answer the same questions. What do you do? Why do you do it? And how is that a catalyst for building wealth in the Black community?
Sure. Just like my fellow panelists, thank you so much, Chloe, for taking the time to talk to us and allow us to share the knowledge that we have been blessed to learn. And I'm thankful to have this opportunity with these panelists. Again, my name is Willette Anita Capers, and I am the Assistant Vice Provost for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at Augustana University. And when I think about what it is that I do, I think of it in a multifaceted region. Number one, I think of it from starting from the ground up. There is a lot of time spending mentoring systemically non-dominant humans, making sure that we're creating safe and brave spaces for folks from systemically marginalized communities to be able to just simply be and exist, not just on our campus, but also in our community. Making sure that we have policies and procedures in place when we have, folks who operate as the agent or the oppressor that comes in to agitate those brave and safe spaces that we create on this basis, and make sure that we're holding people accountable from developing policies and procedures, developing strategic plans. I don't just work with students, I work with faculty, staff, administrators, our entire campus community. I have an amazing team that works with me. And I mean, even right now, I am currently on campus, and as soon as we're done, I'm going to an event where I have some amazing youth of color who are, talking about what the change that they're going to put into the society. Why I do it is because I think back to what was instilled in me from my parents. One of the things my mom and dad always told me was that no one can ever take what's in your head. And so they were very hard on my brothers and I to make sure that we got a quality education, because these were things that they didn't have some of the access to. I grew up in rural South Carolina, right? If you don't know of the Gullah Geechee people, we're the descendants of slaves from West Africa and the West Indies. And, growing up in these barrier lands, on these barrier islands, my parents didn't, have the opportunities that, my brothers and I did. And so for me, I knew I wanted to, have the opportunity to better myself and, for a lack of better words, not get stuck in my low income community and, to see the world. And my parents really invested in me. And when I think about this catalyst for what I do, you all saw a little bit that my research centers around Black women in the academy, and a lot of my passion centers around the education and the support specifically of Black women, and knowing of the intersections of not only being Black, but also being a woman and how we show up in the world today. And for me, when I think about wealth, I think about educational wealth, and understanding that educational wealth, and the old adage that we have to work twice as hard, 3 times as hard just to be considered basic. And so for me, whatever I can do in the aspect and in the lens of how I show up every day, how can I make sure that the young Black women that look like me has what I've had and even more than I had to be able to go out and do great and amazing things and to simply just be in this world that we have the opportunity to exist in.
Thank you so much, Willette, for sharing. I think that, all of your guys' response and comments kind of come together, and the Nexus team really did a beautiful job at curating a panelist that really touched on different points, because together your responses are kind of starting to form a clear picture for what a robust education system or opportunities could look like and should look like. I want to move into talking about more specific questions. So Honora CSR, we're going to start with you. I want to know, how does the sharing of ancestral, cultural, and historical knowledge within the Black community contribute to educational enrichment and empowerment? It's kind of a mouthful. So I'm gonna just drop it in the chat just so people can kind of have a baseline of what we're talking about and what your response is going to be. But if you could talk about how the sharing of ancestral, cultural, and historical knowledge within the Black community contributes to the educational enrichment and empowerment, that would be so wonderful.
Thank you. If I understand your question correctly, well, here's the thing about human beings and families. We need role models. We are social people, social creatures. So we pass down values from generation to generation. So our ancestors who've been living before us and whose shoulders we stand on, they had to do something right. And so paying attention to those lives and that knowledge and those lessons, we have to formulate somehow to take the best of what they had to offer. And so whereas Mary Cloud Bethune, left their last will and testament to us, saying that, education is the prime need of the hour. We have to free ourselves. We have to get going, Dr. Carter G. Woodson, father of Black History Month, and so many other educational things. We have a legacy. One of the challenges are many of our young people or even our generations can't even go back and, to their great grandparents. They might be able to, they got their parents, they got their grandparents, but they don't have too much knowledge of anything beyond that. That's by design. That's called erasure. We don't even know our lineage in a sense. And we're not even taught that it's important to know the wisdom that comes down our lineage from our grandmothers and grandfathers, our elders, and so forth and so on. And in our ancestors in general. And so that's one of the lessons that and pieces that we teach at the Imhotep Science Academy. Even though we're a science academy, we couch it in our culture. We couch it in our intellectual heritage. African people and Africa in general and the African diaspora have contributed a lot to the world and have been used as models for other civilizations and other communities. And this is what we focus on, is how we've contributed to the world and what we have given and how that has come throughout the years, the millennia, the decades, the centuries. And so it's important to give the children a grounding, a foundation of that. You didn't just pop up today. Your people have done something. They are doing something, and you will do something because it's your tradition. It's your legacy to continue on this freedom struggle and these contributions to our community and to the world. And so there's a way to do that, though. There are unique values and priorities or views that we have as an African people, wherever we're at. There's a deep cultural structure that we have within us. Even though we're very unique and very different, there's some pieces in there that make us common, that makes us come together, that makes us have a particular culture that we move around the world with. And we talk about that, we teach about that. We may practice that and learn about that so we can connect with each other and hopefully be more brotherly and sisterly in terms of our community building here. And so let me just see if I'm hitting those points there a little bit. And so, yeah, and so that's really why we have to bring our culture back, because many times this race thinking, which makes us think that we're just unified because of our skin color, that's not enough to unify us. Although we've been enslaved on that, that's not nearly enough. We're much deeper than that. We have customs, we have language, we have views, values, morals, all this stuff. And so they have to learn that people are complex, and that to unify and to work with people is a choice. And you got to have something in common with somebody and appreciate their humanity in order to do that. And so that's what we talk about in terms of identity, our own identity, how we can create that and build in our children, because it's been stripped from us. We're people striving and transforming, coming here, from many different African places on the continent, and many countries, many cultures, many ethnicities, and being melded into one kind of people based on skin color. And so we have some things that we can claim, and we're one of the few people that can claim everything almost and pick what we want. But we brought a lot here still, in terms of values, in terms of retentions from Africa. And so we're shaping ourselves. As you can see, our names have changed and how we identify ourselves, or other people have identified us over time and span here. But, we're kind of getting it together a little bit more in terms of how we even call ourselves, our names, in terms of Black, African-American, so forth, so on. We're not done yet, because we're going through this transformation process. And so that cultural and ancestral knowledge will help us transform into a better community and people and contributor to this world. Thank you.
No, thank you. I really just love that. That was one of the things I was most excited to hear about tonight, was the cultural ways of knowing. And I really think that what you said goes so well with what Nicole from the opening video was talking about. Nicole mentioned that that there's this myth that Black communities are not invested in education, and she kind of says and pushes against that and says, no, we're literate for liberation. And we know that Black communities are into education, because now we know that some of the fastest growing educated people are Black people, but also because we've done it for generations. And I hear you saying the same exact thing. By giving our youth our ancestral and cultural knowledge, we're restoring the truth about our origins and where we come from. So thank you so much for your wisdom and for sharing that. Again, just so excited to have you here this evening. Now I want to move to asking Brian a question. It's kind of taking a sharp right turn. We're going to start talking about different accesses. You mentioned like male, like young African American and Black youth, or young men. And so I'm really excited to hear you talk more about how can we access entrepreneurship, training, apprenticeships, and other really non-traditional opportunities. How can those things be leveraged as a pathway to education, and also economic development for Black people? I'm excited to hear you talk about that. Again, it's kind of a mouthful, so I'm going to drop it in the chat for everybody.
Thank you. I will definitely speak from my own experience. How can entrepreneurship training, okay, sorry. I definitely believe that entrepreneurship and other non-traditional ways of learning, instead of going to post-secondary school. I did not go to college. I do plan on going to school at some point. But when I started this journey as an entrepreneur, I went and went to other people that I look up to, other mentors. In this day and age, there's so many resources to like really creating your own path. As someone who is also a part of Youth Prize organization, I'm not sure if you guys heard of that, but it's basically a nonprofit for young professionals where you're like advocating for the youth and creating opportunities for the youth and changing legislation to have more opportunities for people like myself. And all in all, I just think it's like empowering, but it's like creating a larger community, bringing Black people together, starting at a young age, because like we could listen. I'm 23 years old. I can listen to my parents, but like I know like someone my age doesn't always want to listen to someone who's like 40 and up or like 30 and up. There's people my age who are leaders, who are like, a part of real establishments, real nonprofits. Sorry. We're creating a community. Juxtaposition Arts. It's a design and education center for people who are not just trying to go and learn and be an entrepreneur. Someone's trying to like be an artist, be a designer. Like there's opportunities out there, especially in Minnesota, I believe, to just like create that community.
Absolutely. We love our elders, but I do really think that there is something to be said about like youth mentorship, or it maybe not even youth, but people that took those alternative routes, and you'll see like generational changes, right? Where at certain points, the push was to go to college, and then at certain points it was push for trades, and there's kind of this steady flow. And so having access to people that you trust, I think that's the big part, right? It's the people that you trust, the people that you can relate to. So thank you so much for sharing about, what worked for you from your perspective. I really love the point about mentorship. I think that that's so huge. And when you are in the position to do that for somebody, to really be uplifting the community, that's great. Okay, we're gonna circle back to Willette. So this one is for you. I know that you mentioned working with many stakeholders, and not just the students at Augustana, but also the stakeholders there. So what strategies can educational institutions implement to create more inclusive and equitable learning environments? We do still have students wanting to go to college. So what can those educational institutes do to make those environments inclusive and equitable to our Black students?
Yeah, and I think one of the things that's important to look at is to kind of go back to Hannah Nicole's presentation, and to think about how history how it has impacted those inclusive and those equitable learning environments. I'm looking at my notes over here. So if we go back, and we don't even have to go back that far, but if we go back to Plessy versus Ferguson, and thinking about that was separate but equal. And it was the law saying, okay, we're gonna keep y'all separate, but you're still equal. And then we got Brown versus the Board of Education, what came on later, that says, all right, you say that we're separate but equal. Why do these schools look like this over here? And why do these schools look like this over here? And a lot of people think that our government is just like, no, we need to integrate. No, they could not afford to make everything equal, and so they're just like, all right, let's integrate. But then they decide, we're going to create, we're going to give more money to charter schools, we're going to give more money to these Christian oriented private schools, and we're going to leave education to the states. We're going to make this states' rights. And you got to think, when you think about how schools even get funding, you get funding based off property taxes. And so you got to think about, even with redlining, you got to think about where Black people live. It's some of it's by choice, but the majority of it's like you've been kind of, herded to live in some of these communities across the railroad tracks, to say. And you can't even use multi-dwelling units to be considered when you're looking at those property taxes. So apartment buildings, like all of these things are not looked into when you think about the funding. And so you live in a low income community, then you're going to get low income to be able to fund your schools. And so you get these generational cycles that, again, were created systemically. You got to remember, it happens institutional, interpersonal, personal, societal and cultural when we think about systems of oppression. And these systems are continue to be perpetuated by the agent and by the oppressor. And it wasn't until, even when you think about it's by happenstance that Black people got the rights that we got during the Civil Rights Act of 1964. As we know, that law was passed, for a white man, and Black people just happened, to benefit from it. So when we think about those equitable, it's important to think about how these things are ingrained, unfortunately, within folks. So we got to think about, where does that education come in? So how are we having those diverse curriculum? Where are students having the opportunity to see elements of themselves in what they're learning? And not just during Black History Month or Native American History Month or Hispanic Heritage Month. Like, how can we see these things 365? Even if you have a course on white male writers in the Midwest, I mean, you can do critical critiques looking at what a Black woman writer would critique a William Faulkner or, a Ernest Hemingway and all of these things. People need to see elements of themselves within that curriculum and see those elements of representation. Of course, personal development, professional development. Teachers need to be educated. They need to learn about inclusive language. They need to learn about training. Where does that inclusivity live? Learning about cultural competency. What about anti-racist bias within education? Awareness, responsiveness. How do they lead difficult conversations that are gonna, make people a little, oh wow, I didn't realize we were talking about that. We need to talk about that today. And then addressing accessibility and understanding that accessibility comes into play within all of these aspects. And then where are these support systems? Is there extra avenues for counseling and tutoring? Just like Bryant talked about, mentorship is extremely important, not just for the students, but what about the faculty as well, particularly Black faculty and faculty of color, so that there is that exchange of idea to make sure that they're supporting each other. I will say this, and I'll say this again, policy and policy enforcement has to happen when you're having these inclusive and equitable. I need to know if somebody is breaking what we're seeing are the covenants for our community or for this learning space that we're in, that there's some protections in place and that person is going to be held accountable. And there has to be community and stakeholder engagement. How are we getting involved? How do we know where's that element of it takes a village within that? And then we have to elevate the voice of the student and understanding that their voice matters, and we need to listen, not just listen to hear, but listen to understand. Provide that opportunity for assessment and feedback, and making sure that we're spending time to create these spaces so folks can thrive and be their true and their authentic self.
Thank you, Willette. I love that you always bring an historical lens. I always appreciate that. You kind of set the scene for us as to why we're here. And I just really appreciate that. I love the emphasis on equity that you mentioned, and also the stakeholder engagement. People often forget students as stakeholders and being receptive to their feedback. And so that's really, really important. Thank you for your insights on that matter. I know that we're going to get some Q&A questions about that because I have some, but I'm going to keep going to some additional questions. We do have some time for some additional questions that I want to ask. These are not directed at anybody in particular. So if you're super eager to talk about it, you kind of can. Of course, we know your respective backgrounds. And so if you feel like it's tailored to you, jump in there. If a couple of you have an answer, we surely can hear a couple answers on it. So what I am wondering is that if anybody has any examples of successful initiatives that have utilized Black wealth to advance educational access and attainment, and what lessons can we learn? We've talked a little bit about the problems. We've talked a little bit about your respective expertise and what has worked for you or what you've seen. But now, what are some examples of successful initiatives that have utilized Black wealth to advance educational access and attainment? I'm going to drop that one also in the chat.
I can chime in and share about this amazing program that we have at Augustana, and it's our Journey Scholars Program. It is a program for domestic students of color who want to be the change in their society. There is no GPA requirement coming from high school to be a part of the program. And what it is, that's the event that, as y'all see me like waving over here, my students are coming in now. We're doing this event called the Shark Tank. And this is our group students who are in their second year. We have first year, second year, third year, fourth year. If once you're admitted to the program, whatever your financial aid, like your grant, your Pell Grants don't cover, my office, the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion covers the rest. And it's through their full 4 years here on campus. And so what these students are doing right now is they have to create a social change project that is sustainable, that even once they graduate, that not only, it doesn't even just have to be for our campus, it can be for the entire community. And we have judges, and the university has set aside money. And so what they're doing right now is pitching their projects. So each group has a project, and whatever project wins in their third year, which is next year, that group will spend the entire year cultivating that project. But that program, we have seen from the first year, from 11 students a part of that program to 37 to 45 to 50 and they stay a part of this program, and we're paying for them to be here. We've got them, mentors across our city. We have amazing guest speakers that come in, and it's really providing access. Our university is the most expensive university in our state. And it can, deter students from, who are more cost conscious from, wanting to attend. And we want them to know this is a space for you. You belong here. It's not that someone is creating a space for you. This is your space the same way it's a white student space, or a rich student space, or whoever. This is your space as well. And so this program is my baby. I absolutely love these students, and I am so excited and so proud of the HE double hockey sticks that they are going to raise in the world when they graduate. So I'm definitely proud of them.
Thank you, Willette, for sharing the success that's going on at Augustana. That sounds like a fantastic program. I think the thing that I love the most when I'm hearing about it is how they're really in this exchange, a constant exchange. The students get in based upon their hard work, and then they're rewarded financially to be able to attend the institution, and then they get to participate in something worthwhile for the community, and they're compensated for that as well through their education and other. And so it's this kind of symbolic, relationship that's happening. And I think that's a perfect example of one of the efforts that's paying off. So thank you so much for sharing. Did any of our other panelists have a example initiative that they would like to share?
I did want to touch base back on with Youth Prize. Our organization, we are youth led. So like, even though there are many people who run the organization, a fellowship that I'm a part of, we have many fellowships that are youth led. Mine particularly is for Change the Narrative for young people. It's like a narrative leader fellowship. And the fellowship is to basically change the narrative for the stigma that goes on in the Minneapolis community, specifically the north part of Minneapolis, how like there's so much crime and danger on like in that community when there really isn't. So like our job is to like change that narrative and create more and shed more light into those communities. So like that's all youth led, and I think it really would help you young people develop skills to like be a leader, or like take more initiative when it comes to like learning how to create a podcast, or learn how to like lead groups or delegate tasks to other people, or be more organized. There's just so many other parts of like, education and like skills when it comes to these fellowships. And I also believe there's like more opportunities with school as well. Like they are very supportive of people who are in school, and many other things part of that as well. So I just wanted to talk about Youth Prize a little bit more and how we have many fellowships available.
Absolutely. Those, grassroots, it sounds like kind of a grassroots type of organization and approach. Those absolutely have a space in the change and in the movement. And so thank you so much for sharing, Bryant. Shireen dropped in the chat to use the Q&A section to start populating. I do have a couple more questions that we have time for our panelists, and so we want to make sure that we're using them for our whole time slot to get as much information that we can. But if you guys have questions, make sure that you're kind of preparing and putting them in the Q&A section, so when we move to that portion, that we have those ready to go for our panelists. Because I know I can't be the only person with questions over here. Okay, so we talk a lot about different ways of education, different ways of knowing. Bryant has talked a lot about entrepreneurship and kind of youth-led initiatives. Willette has talked about higher education, post-secondary education. Honora CSR has talked about youth movements and youth education, as well as cultural ways of knowing. So now what I want to know is, how can we talk about and use, like, what role does cultural community knowledge play in education, and how can it be integrated into mainstream educational systems? So one of the things I immediately think of is that there's cultural ways of knowing, and so I'm thinking like assessments, I'm thinking just other community knowledge. How can that be integrated into mainstream systems?
I think that a lot of these systems obviously weren't designed for us, as Nicole Anna Jones has talked about. They're designed to dehumanize us. They're designed to miseducate us, and they have done a very good job of that. The education that I received that was most relevant to my humanity was the knowledge from my community. It wasn't from the public schools. I went to St. Paul Central High School. I went from St. Paul, the old Rondo area, born and raised there. Good educational systems. Taught me to be a good soldier. Matter of fact, I had a full ride to the University of Minnesota in electrical engineering. I had internships at Honeywell designing some of the smartest weapons in the world. But why do I want to do that? To blow up people? Where's some values in that? You know what I'm saying? And so my consciousness came, which I think is the real wealth in which we're trying to get to our children, because we can create some very educated people in our community, but are against our interest in community. And that is by design from all these public school systems. So anything that we do, we're trying to force those systems to change and reflect us in some way. But at Central, I was part of a program. Some people today would call it DEI program. It's called a Central Minority Education Program, ran by an elder, African-American lady, whose target was to help minority students, and particularly Black students, because at that time at Central, Black students were the predominantly minority, right? And so she would take us on field trips to different businesses and stuff like that. She'd make sure there was Black History Month programs for us to try to get some fat on our head, because you took history, but you didn't learn enough about Black people. You learned about slavery, but you didn't learn how that was connected or what that had to do with you, right? Matter of fact, most people were ashamed of slavery at the time because they didn't know what the connection was, that we had a history before that and all that kind of stuff. But my senior year, they were going to cut that program. And this is the program that took me on a field trip, a whole bunch of Black students to Honeywell. And that's how I got connected to getting this scholarship and this internship. I was a good student. I was an A student in math and science, but I didn't get this cultural piece. I was like to, her name was Miss Katie McGuire. I asked her, you know, what's the big deal about this program, Andy? You know, she said, well, you wouldn't have that scholarship or that internship, and none of the other Black students would have their little opportunities, what they're doing, if it wasn't for this program that I created to help you guys get these experiences and opportunities that you wouldn't normally have in this kind of institution. So it wasn't, I didn't get that because I was smart. I got that because the community forced the school board to put that program at Central because Black students were doing so dismal at that city school. You see what I'm saying? And so these schools aren't designed for us. You have to make space for Black students in there until you can change that system and structure, which we're not close to. Just yet to this morning, I read an article about the Noka Hennepin School Board. Black students and other students went there to protest because they're trying to cut all the DEI programs, all the student support programs, and the the LGBT all the diversity type programs. Are trying to cut it out the budget, and so students are upset because that creates spaces for our students to create community in there, whereas the schools are designed to isolate us and not connect with us, and to diminish our history and our contributions, as well as they're going to cut. Minnesota just recently have an ethnic studies requirement for schools, or it's a mandate, but it's not enforceable, put it that way, for ethnic studies, for people to learn about other people's cultures, Native American, African American, so forth, so on. So the Noka Hennepin is trying to cut that too. So you don't know nothing about what happened in the past. So this whole system is doing what Hannah Cole Jones said. It's doing what it's supposed to do. It's supposed to erase you and take you out of the whole equation of education. And so the only thing that can stop that kind of power is another power. That power is your community. We have to invest in our community. We cannot take our community for granted. You have to build that. You have to build a conscience of functional unity, and you can't get that just by doing nothing. It takes engagement with those who you are. And so Katie McGuire, once she told me it was the community that was responsible for me getting that full ride and all that stuff, I went right to she referred me to two people, Mahmoud El-Kati and Patricia Hickman. Professor El-Kati is one of the greatest professors and educators in Minnesota, African-American, and Patricia Hickman is one of the most profound activists that really speaks truth to power. And she made me go speak at the school board meeting trying to save this program when I was a senior in high school back in the day. And so once I learned that it's community that moves things, that's when she connected me to the community, and I understood I was Black by default all the way up to that point. And now I'm like, oh, I'm greater because they were supporting me and they didn't even know I was even in this school. They were helping me out and I didn't even know who they were. So we take things for granted. When we take things for granted, we lose them. And so we must teach our children about, they have a community. You have institutions that support you. You have elders, you have ancestors, you have mothers and fathers, uncles, and other youth out here that are trying to create a better way of life. And that's where the investment has to go. That's where the education has to go in order to check these systems and make them more conducive to our needs and force them to change. Thank you.
No, thank you for your insight, your wisdom, and I really appreciate someone who's been there for the history. There's power in the youth, but man, there's power in our history and the people who've been there and who've paved the way for us. And so, no, really thank you for your insight and all that you've added to the conversation today. I think that that's really exactly it, that there is a community, that there is a different way of knowing, and that the forces have to they kind of have to clash a little bit to get that change done. And one of the questions that we had for a different panelist who couldn't make it tonight was about what can grassroots and community-based organizations do to be kind of the changing force? Because if we are operating in a system that isn't made for us, what types of programs need to be out there to kind of combat the system that we're in. And we win small battles, and then we lose, and then we win. So what can be done? And we're talking a lot about the traditional education system, but what I want to kind of take a little bit of a turn into is talk about like the trade route. What types of programming, what types of things is going on in the trade industry to get what resources are out there, what really just how are trades, what is your experience with trades currently?
Um, my experience so far is with Youth Prize and Juxtaposition Arts. Juxta is solely based on youth art and design. I would consider that a trade, but also like as far as like carpentry and building homes, like there's so many other pathways that are out there. I know a couple of my friends, my peers, went to Summit Academy to get their license to get their CDLs, to get their license to be a plumber or to there's just so many other pathways. I don't have personally like organizations that I know at the top of my head, but I do know people who are um, in those fields. So I can direct you to those people. But as far as I know, is with Juxtaposition and Youth Prize, we do have a lot of other trades, and Youth Prize also has a lot of support with people who are trying to go to school and with people who are trying to go to go to trade school as well. So yeah.
Yeah, and I think some of OIC and several other like community colleges, I mean, are no cost, or low cost. Even Job Corps is right by the state fair, has training, and it's residential, has residential options. And so, and we're underrepresented in all of those. And it's to a point where, the education is paid for, and so that is, and once they get into those fields, you start at the bottom, but the potential for the earning power is incredibly high for all of those, electrician, all the constructions, plumbing, even the solar is huge now, the solar technicians, all that stuff. So, it's a matter of exposure. That's one of the issues, is that our children don't get the variety of opportunities that's out there. That's one thing about the Central Minority Education Program I was in. That's why we went on so many field trips, so they can expose us to different fields and different companies and all that stuff out there. How would you see them otherwise? All we got is TV. Oh yeah, I'm gonna be, well, a basketball player mainly that I want to be, but I'm gonna be a doctor, but I don't know it's gonna take 8 years, and so that whole exposure piece is critical. But the trades wide open. I'm also a Minneapolis firefighter. We just closed our opening for being a firefighter in Minneapolis, but we pay for your education. We actually pay you to get educated, and once you become a firefighter, then we start you off at $75,000 a year. And so, who knows about that though? And you only work 100 days a year. You got 265 days to do whatever else we want. And so who knows about that? Nobody, I mean, except those who've been there and who tells their children, their nephews and nieces and all that stuff. That's why it's been such, we haven't been involved, because people have been telling their family members all the time, or their community. Well, we got to share this with our community and other underrepresented communities.
Do you think that because of the push for post-secondary education, that like the Black community has like shied away from trades, just as like, there's just this huge push to go to college, almost as like a status symbol. I kind of laugh at how many degrees there are available now, that you can get a degree in anything. And so, like, do you think that people are just like, why do you think that there's like a lower interest in trades?
I believe that my peers, I would say my peers because I'm still young, and a lot of my peers are, we're going through the same thing. I think we are discouraged, and because we were brought up to be forced to go post-secondary school or go to university, like myself, I've always known that I wanted to be an artist. I've always known that I wanted to, be my own boss. And going to school, there were not many opportunities or many other pathways while I was still in high school to, like, practice or, go on field trips. I didn't really go on many field trips in high school. I don't really remember if anybody at the school did, but I just think it's like either lack of um, engagement with the Black youth by our older generations that are actually at the schools, because I know outside of the schools there are opportunities. It's limitless, but like when it comes to the Black people in the school, they don't know where to go when it comes to something outside of just going to college. So I just think we're just a little bit discouraged, and also in this day and age, like social media plays a huge part in a lot of things. A lot of people want to be influencers or lash techs. No shade to you guys, but there's so much more than lash techs and influencers. So yeah, I just think we people like myself need to go to those high schools and tell them like what else there is outside of just going to get a four-year degree. Not saying that's not bad or anything, but like there are other opportunities. And I think like Anora said, that's how you say your name, right? Okay, yeah. Like community, like we need to be more engaged. We need to come together more. Like that is the important piece. Community.
Absolutely. Thank you for bringing the youth voice um, into the conversation today. That's really greatly appreciated by myself, and I'm sure others as well, to kind of hear and see what the thought process is going on, and what we can do or how we can address some of those things. I know, especially being in the Midwest, it can be really hard. You talk about okay, I'm going to do flooring or I'm going to do roofing. And I know who I see do flooring and I do roofing, and it's not Black people. And so you can kind of already exclude yourself from those fields because you're not seeing yourself. So exposure, exposure, exposure. I think every one of you guys hit on that. And so that is great. I love the discussion that we were having for a little bit there. We finally, I feel like, got a little comfortable. There was a little like kind of bouncing back between the panelists, and I really appreciated that. Um, if we don't have, I'm not going to ask another question because I want to stay on time. So if you guys have, does anyone else, any of our panelists have any like last words on any of our questions before we kind of move ahead in our schedule? Okay, perfect. Well, I'm going to invite everybody again to participate in the Q&A answer session. So you guys have been, all of our attendees have been muted the entire time. So now is kind of your guys' opportunity to engage directly with our experts, share your guys' thoughts, pose any of the burning questions that you have. So whether you're seeking clarification, you want to offer insights, or you have resources that you want to share, or you're just simply eager to dive into something that we talked about tonight, I definitely encourage you guys to go to the Q&A section, type in your questions so we can get those answered. So without further ado, we're going to go ahead and move into our Q&A session. So our very first question is, it's a lengthy one, but how can we effectively integrate Gallup's 5 essential elements of wellness: career, social, financial, physical, and community well-being, into programs and initiatives specifically tailored to the Black community to enhance overall quality of life and to address systematic barriers. So, even if you're not familiar with Gallup's 5 essential elements of wellness, I think that the general question is, how can we effectively integrate all of the elements of wellness, so career, social, financial, physical, community well-being, into the programs and initiatives that we're tailoring to the Black community to enhance the quality of life and address the systematic barriers?
Man, I don't know about that. I can tell you this, though, you can't do none of that until you have a functional community. I can tell you that. If you're not learning with a group of Black people, you ain't doing nothing. You got to organize, you got to connect, you got to recognize each other's humanity, and then we got to get on the same page with some educational stuff. You can't ask for the world. You'll be defeated. You'll be disappointed. That's why we can't move the stuff we're moving. We're getting this society helps separate us. They help us become individuals, thinking we can do everything on our own. I'm this, I'm that. I got, and it's just not true. No one works alone. No one operates as an individual. And in this system, we have to operate in a collective. One group I'm part of is Solidarity Twin Cities. Each month, every fourth Friday at the what's the school's name? High School for Recording Arts over in St. Paul, right there off University in Lexington, kind of, is a community class that they talk about issues that we're talking about just like now, today, different topics every month dealing with our community. We have to have an educational process of our own still. We have to educate ourselves within our families and then our broader community. That's where we have to start so we can make sure we're not Black by default, but we're consciously Black, that we have more in common than just our skin color. That's not going to hold us. I gotta see our visions and see where they line up, and then we'll start working together more and more and more, like this Nexus group. Y'all doing dynamite. I know you guys getting paid to do something what you're doing, but you wouldn't have got there unless you thought similarly, and collectively, and that you can work on this goal together. And so that's where we have to start. We got to build the building blocks in the pyramid base before we go on. And that's in all the programs I'm part of. And I think, all programs you have to have the educational piece in there. And you got to engage some community in young people. As Brian was saying, we got to connect to our youth. They have to be exposed. There has to be an intergenerational connection. Otherwise, we're going to lose each other. How everybody talks about, oh, yeah, this younger generation ain't this. All those elders don't know nothing, man. Well, how they, all that stuff is going to continue to happen until we connect.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. You said you don't know nothing about that, but you seem to know something about that. You're talking about being in community with each other, and before we can address elements of well-being, I very quickly popped up the Gallup 5 essential parts of the well-being. It says that 98% of the world, so this wasn't just a national thing, this was a global thing, said that good health and wealth are 2 of the most common responses for their overall well-being. And a lot of that well-being is centered around community well-being, engagement, career well-being, social well-being, financial well-being. And so I think that you actually answered that, right where we need to be, being in community and focusing on your health in those areas. Willette or Bryant, did you have anything to add about the areas of well-being?
I just want to quickly add, I think it's important for community leaders and other leaders to recruit or outreach to other schools to show that there's other opportunities to, oh, sorry, that's a great question. But I think it's important to like recruit people to like join the communities and let these schools know that there is a community for you, and you know there are opportunities.
Yes, thank you so much, Bryant, for adding that to the conversation. We've got a couple really good questions in here. Another one is that it was said that we are talking about wealth in a intangible way. That many Black people have amassed a lot of educational credentials, yet those degrees have not translated into ownership and financial wealth. What do you feel is needed for Black individuals in our communities to own land, build more avenues of ownership, and collective wealth building?
I definitely think it's a good question. Um, Man, that's hard because financial is not my foray. Uh, you know what? I'm gonna step back on that one because I don't think I'm probably the best one to answer that one.
Well, I mean, that's the thing. Dr. Carter G. Woodson, who was the second PhD graduate from Harvard University, um, um, said that, and that's after he graduated, and that was considered like unthinkable and unbelievable at the time. He was after W.E.B. Du Bois. He was the first one. But he said that Harvard has ruined more Negro minds than bad whiskey. And so saying that these institutions, they're designed to give you certain skills and certain values to operate in this country's interests. So in order, you know, and we can see this, we can see in the Biden administration, his vice president, his secretary of defense, his representative to the United Nations, the top ambassador, you got his White House key spokesman, brilliant brothers and sisters. I don't know where their values lie in terms of this whole Gaza and Palestine thing. You know what I'm saying? How can we have so many brilliant Black people in that? And we know that this kind of war, this kind of oppression is going on, and we can't stop the fighting. I mean, brilliant in the seats and halls of power. So we have a problem with this values thing. And so even Du Bois retracted on the talented 10 thing, you know, in terms of our top PhDs and scholars and all this stuff are going to help build our community. Not if they go for self and they're trying to just make the money. It doesn't, it's kind of, you know, to their individual direction, it's not going to make sense because they're going to make all the money and do for self. The consciousness of, or the thought of the collective, of elevating the collective, is not necessarily there, and it's definitely not guaranteed. And that's why it's up to that community to get that. You can't insert it into a racist institution directly. You got to create space in there with your space and your minds, your people, to get that in there, you know. And so there's a dynamic. So I hear the question with all these PhDs, why aren't we building more wealth? That's because we don't have the right values, and it's still rigged against us. That's what we have to figure out. And so I don't know what the answer is either, but I know what the problem is.
And even on top of that, you know, you got to dismantle those systems that has caused us not to have, you know, those access. So you got to dismantle the system that is perpetuating the system, and then you got to dismantle the mental capacity that continues, that, you know, maybe has some of those values and those priorities in the wrong place. So until you break down, you can't build up.
Yeah, and again, I think that you've kind of touched on the answer. You touched on it before and you've touched on it again, and that it's going back to community. That's again something I love about Nexus community partners, is that it's rooted in community and having those community answers, or starting to come to them collectively. It really kind of always continually comes back to that. I saw a TikTok um the other day, and I wish I was trying to think of the direct quote, but I can't. But man, all she did in the video was repeatedly repeat that Black people in positions of power are not going to save you. That's not the direct quote, but she kept repeating it over and over again, because you're right, we think that we're going to obtain these positions, but we're plugging right back into the existing system. And so leaning back on those historical and shared values that we have, that you touched based on, is really, really important. So I think you guys ended up having really great insight on that one. Another question that we got was, I'm wondering what advice you might have for young people who may be attending a PWI or a predominantly white institute.
Yeah.
Institution
I
or
would,
workplace. I'm sorry about that.
oh no, I apologize. I always say find your people, because your people are going to be there to support you, cheer you on. They're going to hold you accountable. So, that's why I'm very hard on our Black Student Union, our African Student Union, our La Union Hispania, our Gender and Sexuality Alliance, because, these are the people who, granted, you're not the same, but who kind of understand, you know, what it takes to even be in some of those spaces. And so once you find your people, find your support system, make sure that you all are encouraging each other, but make sure your voice is heard. Get involved. Get in the student government association. Make sure that other people like you. When you're moving up in the ranks, you should need to be pulling people up too. Also, let people know that I don't speak for all Black people. I don't speak for all people of color. I speak for myself. Now there might be some similarities, but I am me and she is she. And then um, I'm really big on boundaries and making sure people understand. But I'm also really big on folks learning on who I am and why I believe what I believe, and I want to learn about others. And so I'm a very open person, and I also encourage other people in predominantly white spaces to to learn, but also educate. And then on top of that, protect your peace. One of the things that you got to do is sometimes you get tired and you don't want to educate, or you're tired of explaining how you braided your hair or how long it took, and you just what, protect your peace. Sometimes you just go and you go to your closet and you go to your space, and you have your you time. And that's why it's important to have your people who understands when you want to say, girl, if they ask me one more time if this my real hair, I'm gonna scream. So protect your peace too.
I was just gonna ask that, Willette, can you speak on the taking care of yourself? But you got there, so thank you so much for that. While I have you talking, Willette, um, somebody asked you directly, um, that kind of bouncing off a question that you asked earlier, why are policies important in education, and what national policies should we be paying attention to right now?
You definitely got to pay attention to the attack on DE&I programs. The attack on language, and people are saying, we don't want to talk about diversity. We don't want to, we don't want these woke people having these conversations. And one of the things that I always ask people is, well, do you even know what diversity, equity, and inclusion means? How do you show up? One is a who I am, whether you want to talk about it or not. And the other one is an action that we all can do. And equity is making sure that, it's not us getting the same, it's me getting what I need to be successful. I might need less than you, or I might need it a little bit differently than you. And so in understanding about how and why and where these systems show up every single day. And so for me, I say, pay attention. Also pay attention to organizations that are just trying to check off a box when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion, or do they really want to do the work? So paying attention to that. I also tell people you need to be looking at particularly those people who end up going to state institutions, in that those policies are going to be very different than policies that happen, at private institutions. Like we're at Augustana, we're the only university in the state of South Dakota that has an Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. And so, I've had students say, well, I was going to SDSU, but I decided to come to Augie because it seems that you all have doubled down on what you say is in that. So pay attention to those things. Pay attention to financial matters that are getting ready to come out within the Supreme Court in regards to even funding that goes to universities for programs that might, be centered around people of color, particularly Black people, any and everything people. There are court cases that are coming to challenge, and it's not affirmative action, but just anything that people feel is giving a leg up, or supporting people of color, particularly Black people, in society. So yeah, there's some stuff coming.
Thank you. Be on the
Vote,
lookout.
vote, vote.
Thank you. So next question that we got in the chat is that says, I recently spoke about my career to Roseville High School with junior achievement. Many of the students in 11th and 12th grade were worried that they didn't know what they wanted to do when they graduated high school. How would you put these youth's mind at ease?
Oh man, I would tell them that it's okay to not know. Many successful people, we call it vocation, and it's stumbling upon your vocation. Like, I went to school I was going to go to law school, and I wanted to, write screenplays. I had no earthly idea that doing diversity, equity, inclusion, and social justice work, which was just naturally my passion, could actually be my career. And sometimes it's, finding a mentor, is asking questions. And even if, they want to take a gap year and, work and spend some time, figuring out what it is they want to do, or even going into college and saying, if they do go to college, not declaring a major, and take those initial courses that we all got to take in that freshman year anyway, to really ask the question and figure it out what it is that they want to do. I think that is something. So one of the things I would say to ease their mind is, like, the majority of us don't know what we're going to do. Even if you go to college, if y'all only know how many times we change our majors, even in the first year. I have one student that has had like 6 majors in their freshman year and first year. And I'm like, yep, that's all right. It's okay. We're going to figure it out. You're going to find the passion, what you want to do. They go from dance to music to nursing but I know we like to think about how and what our parents do. 9 times out of 10 for Black people in particular, people of color, we choose jobs that we think help our community. But then you end up in a job that you really didn't want to do. Mom and dad told you to go and be a nurse, or they told you to go and do this when this is not your passion, or this is not something that you're even really good at. You might be squeamish when it comes to blood. I don't want you drawing my blood and you're going to cry every time you pull out a needle. But if you're someone, has a passion for fighting for the rights of others, or maybe you tell it through filmmaking, or maybe you tell it through through art, or working with schools like the ACE Academy. Like, it's about finding where your passion and your joy come together, and not following what others want you to do, because at the end of the day, You're gonna be doing it for a real long time, and you want to be happy as you do it.
Brian, as a young person, do you have sorry, Nora, I see that you just clicked your off button. I was just wondering if Bryant had anything to add to the conversation as a young person, as like what might have helped them, you know, if they were in that position, or maybe they know some of their peers or anything like that.
Yes, this is like kind of sounds like me. After high school, I actually joined the military. I was in the military for 4 years. My initial goal was to be an army and was paid for, but you know the army's not for everybody. I'm no longer serving. I had the same questions because all my life I knew I wanted to be my own boss. I knew that I wanted to be an artist or you know model and travel the world. I know I had these things I want to do. I just didn't know exactly how to get there. And I think that's totally fine. No one has it figured out. Like no one at all has it all figured out. So like I think telling, you know, 17, 18-year-olds that know to figure out and like, you know, you have time, not right time. You know, I think that will ease a young child's mind that everything is gonna be okay. You know, you have time to figure out your life.
Nora, do you have what you wanted to say now?
No, go ahead. I think Brian hit on it. Definitely Willette hit on it. So yeah, I was just affirming what they said.
Okay, thank you guys all so much for adding to that conversation. I love the different perspectives. And then especially Brian as a youth of like what would have worked for you. And that also you can try things, and if it doesn't work out, it didn't work out. You know, here you are, you're still doing your brand and working for yourself, and you know, the military didn't keep you down too long. Okay, so our last Q&A question that we have is that we know that the educational system is currently in an abysmal state. What are some fields of study that we really need to encourage our children? I think Willette was just saying, stop doing this. Encourage our children and community to master so that we're not so dependent on others. For instance, the health and science fields are occupied predominantly by folks from the Asian community. Can we identify the top 10 fields that we need to make sure our youth are exposed to and have some expertise so that we're not shut out of these economically lucrative fields?
You know, I've said my piece on that one already. But I would definitely say just pay attention to what people talking about. Like AI is something that a lot of people have been talking about. But even then, even when you think about these type of things, we were talking about AI for a while. Like once a student gets their degree, I mean, it changes. It changes over time. It changes over a period. The next big thing comes. I mean, if you want to think, I mean, lucratively, I mean, just think about the traditional things that we can't do without. Like, we got to have doctors, we got to have lawyers, we got to have, I mean, I work in education. Clearly I did not get in this job for the money because you know how we pay, you know, our educators, unfortunately, but you know, how can they move mountains and where can we see, you know, I want to see more Black meteorologists. I want to see more people, you know, studying and, you know, to hear about when I see, you know, hurricanes and tornadoes and all of this. So it's important to make sure that we don't create a system of this is going to be the thing, and then when it's not the thing, now you know we've got somebody that is investing a lot of time and a lot of money into something that you know that might not be lucrative and it might be not be the thing anymore. So I mean, at the end of the day, just think about what our society can't live without functionally. Think about Maslow's hierarchy of need, like the bottom, the basics, the foundations, and those are the things I would say without a doubt would never go anywhere. One thing that would never go away are doctors and morticians, because we all gonna be born and we all gonna die. And with that, I have to leave.
Thank you so much, Willette, for joining us. For all of our attendees, we do have, we're gonna have some resources that we're gonna post. So we're gonna draw our Q&A section to a close. I think I got all of the questions in the chat. Again, I want to extend a heartfelt thank you to our panelists. You guys were just top notch tonight. Our audience members for their insightful questions and their engagement. And so before we wrap up this evening, I would just like to announce that the next two slides are going to be displayed for about a minute each. The first slide is going to provide resources related to today's discussion, and then offer like further reading and exploration opportunities for you. And then the second slide is going to have the contact information for the Open Road Fund and Nexus community partners on it, so you can reach out with any follow-up questions or inquiries. So take that time to jot down any information that you find valuable. And then reach out, of course, if you need support today and this evening. Thank you for spending your evening with us. I know it was dinner time, but tonight's conversation was really, really top tier. I just can't thank our panelists and our attendees enough. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you, Chloe, and everybody else. Great job, Brian. I'm looking at you in the future here. You're doing some great work.
Again, we're going to leave those slides up for a little bit. So if anybody needs that stuff, they can write it down. Our panelists are, I believe they're free to go. Again, we thank them for their time, and we're going to have contact information if we have anything to follow up with.
Thank you guys. This might be, so I kind of want to stay, but I'm just.
Yeah, you guys are more than welcome to hang out. Once we give people time to write these things down, we will kind of close out. I definitely want to express my gratitude to each and every one of you guys who joined us today. This was a really important topic. It's been enlightening for me and thought-provoking. I again want to extend my deepest appreciation to our panelists for sharing their expertise and insights with us. And then, of course, our great audience members. So thank you again, and we look forward to more of Nexus's events. And don't forget the survey.
There should be a survey. I was just going to say it. Go ahead.
Oh, go ahead. I was going to say the survey, guys, the survey.
The survey should be coming in the chat. There will be a video version as well of this that we recorded for tonight. That'll be up on our YouTube in about a week or so. So just be looking out for that. Feel free to share it. And then that survey link will also be attached with that as well. So thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Everyone should have had enough time to get everything down. You guys know how to contact us. So thanks again. And so until next time, take care and rest well and stay inspired. Bye, everybody.